We have. And we just have another slide here as well to explain the interpretation.
Great, and I can give the floor to Katie to kick us off, if that's okay, Katie, with you.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Shanaz, and thank you, Rose. And welcome to the subsequent session. We're very pleased to have an amazing lineup of speakers, and I'll turn right over to Sanam Amin, who will introduce our session and set the stage. So Sanam, over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie. It is a great privilege to be speaking at the opening of this event and to be part of the People's General Assembly. It is a really wonderful tradition that we have maintained to remind us that this space is our space and nothing about us without us. I'm very pleased to be speaking here on behalf of the Women's Major Group and the Action Nexus, and introducing our event today and just setting out the context that leads us to this topic of corporate capture versus systems change, identifying a feminist way forward. So first of all, I want to just highlight a couple of steps along the way just months ago, because we started, I think, in July at the High Level Political Forum with really bringing us back to exactly this issue that I've put in my background, the system change aspect, because it is a problem to us that the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, which in any case was never going to be the radical agenda that feminists and social justice movements were asking for, but still it is a problem that it has been co-opted in many ways and taken on board as a way of really making what our colleagues, including I think Emilia Reyes, who will be speaking later, has described as tourist videos that governments and even corporations alike are able to point to the SDGs. It is a problem that this agenda can be taken on while great damage is being done and while our sort of demands for greater system change, which is the only way that we will see justice and change in our communities, can happen. And coming forward from the High Level Political Forum, where we really talked about what that system change looks like and what we mean by that, and how do we connect that to the way that we're using the Sustainable Development Goals as a pathway, we also kind of got drawn into, I would say, a great illustration of what corporate capture really means in terms of the multilateral space and specifically the United Nations. So myself and several others who are here today were deeply alarmed by the signature of between the largest investment firm in the world, BlackRock, and UN Women, which is one of the UN agencies and supposed to be the leading on gender equality. And this, as we built our opposition and saw many of you stand with us in voicing that opposition, we found that it was not just this agreement that was a problem. It was many, many agreements that are going on, and not just with the UN Women, but with many entities. We were reminded of a long history of Uber signing an agreement with UN Women and feminists opposing it, of OHCHR having an agreement with Microsoft and civil society opposing it. And even as we organized around BlackRock, we saw the backroom deals going on in Colombia with UNDP and with corporations that were strenuously opposed by indigenous communities. So I'm reminded, and I speak to you from stolen land, in a very tense moment where in a country that has never reconciled with its indigenous communities, and with the colonial takeover. And yet we see corporations being given all kinds of space and recognition and contracts and the leniency and power of international law that our communities are not. And this is what we want to talk about today. We want to bring forward indigenous rights, women's rights, workers' rights, and say that this is the big change that we're asking for. Not the small leftover takeaways, not the corporate social responsibility. We are not going to them to beg them to come to the table and give their power away a little bit. We ask the governments to step up and recognize that the social contract is about their duty to us, and that at the end of the day, as we really saw, that UN Women backed down from this agreement with BlackRock because of the outrage and because of people power. And this should tell us that corporate power is nothing when it comes to people power. And our speakers today, I think, will illustrate how the fight ahead is long, but that it is possible. And with that, I want to pass it on to Sundita from Bangladesh, who is with a fantastic, fierce organization, Kormojibi Nari. And from there, we'll hear from a couple of other speakers as well. So Sunjita Sultana, Appa, apne jokhoni shuru korte chan shuru koren, please.
Thank you, Sanam. Welcome to my presentation. And not just a presentation, it is just experience sharing from my Bangladesh experience and our struggle with the women and women workers. I'm working in an organization named Kormojibi Nari, that Sanam said. It is a Bangla word, it means working women. And our organization was established in 1991. It started work in 1991, and it is a still women-headed, women by the women for the women organization. And
Sunzida, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Would it be possible perhaps to keep the microphone a little closer?
Oh,
Yeah,
now it is okay.
that's perfect. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank-
Sunzida. Sorry.
Thank you. So it is a women-headed organization, and our organization was formed by a group of women who are a background of student and worker, cultural and women's movement. This background of people or women are have a dream to create such an organization where women and women workers can bloom and can gather and can make their movement with all. So in this dream, they started this organization, and main thing was in that time in 1991, or in our country, the movements or the worker rights movements were mainly backed or done by the upper classes and the elite people, and also the women rights movement, but they cannot that their demands are not so much for the working people, related to the working people. So our founder president Shirin Akhtar MP, she is now a member of parliament also, she felt, and her sisters felt that it is not the right way to make the movement. This movement should be by the workers. So they started organizing the workers, go to the working people, the RMG workers, and in that time the pharmaceuticals workers, and jute workers, jute industries workers. They started to organize them, and from that very 1991, we are still running in our with our mission and vision, a just and egalitarian society free from exploitation, deprivation, and discrimination, in which women workers, women and laborers enjoy their rights, dignity, power, and authority. This the main driving force, our driving force to work for the rights, dignity, power, and authority of women and women workers. And we are working with three main pillars, that is gender equality, worker rights, and economic justice. And in through these pillars, we are mainly works with many sectors. In our country, we call it formal sector workers and informal sector workers. Formal sectors workers, we are working in RMG, that means ready-made garment industries, textile industries, leather industries, and also seafood processing industries. And with informal sector workers, we are working with domestic worker, migrant worker, agriculture workers, sanitation waste collectors, home-based worker, and so on. Many, and you know, in our country, the formal and informal sector workers are, if we see the number, almost 80% are informal sector workers in our labor force, and other service sector workers also there, and at present the formal industrial workers. But if we see the if we see the formal sectors also, there are also the process of informalization we can find there also. And in this informalization process, through this informalization process, the workers are working in a precarious condition with no decent work, and also the other rights of laborers. In this situation, our strategy to organize or to prepare the women workers for their achieving their rights or their voice raised. So our strategy is to connecting with the workers, develop their awareness and leadership, encourage them to participate in various committees, organizations, and trade unions also. And we also work with trade unions. We are not a trade union organization. We are women workers organizations, organization, and especially women workers organization. But we are very much work with the trade unions. We prepared the women workers to go involved in the trade unions and go the leadership positions in the trade union. We also conduct various action type research to know the situation of workers and what is going on in the field, and we based on that we prepare our future advocacy strategy. And we do a lot of advocacy with the government and also policymakers and other duty bearers. And in these advocacy and campaigns, we also involve our women, grassroots level women, to raise their voice for their rights. Another point, we are working with other like-minded civil society organizations. We create many platforms, networks to building alliances and make our voices stronger and the movement stronger. In such a, we are working at present, we are working in Bangladesh, and we are also the networking with the other regional level platforms also to make the feminist movement stronger, and the other labor rights issue, migrant rights issues. We are also working with them. So if I can now see what is the challenges to doing such works, and today our topic also about the corporate intrusion, what can I say? I can say firstly, based on the labor or worker rights issues, the new liberal policies are all over the world going on. In our country also it is going on. And I said about informalization, if you see, I can give an example, small examples. We are working with the seafood processing workers, and these factories are very far from the capital city and very far from the all media and other focus areas. It is a coastal areas where many factories are established to processing the seafood and sea fish and other food items. So in these factories, it is a factory and it is under the labor law. But in these factories, women are working for a long time, say 20 years, 16 years, but they are still informal workers. They are still appointed by some contractors, and they are getting very less amount of wages and no other facilities. So and in these areas, once in 1990, 2009 and 10, in that time, trade union movement was very strong, and in that time the minimum wage was declared for the worker and other facilities was given, but by the corporations, by the owners, and with government, this movement was ruined, and all the trade union leaders and members are sacked, fired by the factories owners, and and now you can find factory unions, but they are all yellow union. So it is all over the sectors where I can say the power of the business people and the employers. And it is very much to be noted that in our country, there is the politicians, you cannot find the seasoned politicians. You can find rather the bureaucrat politicians and the business person politicians. And these politicians are by their money, they're getting their power, and they are now in the member of parliament. And one research says that about 32% business person and bureaucrats are the member of parliament. So when we do our advocacy for the rights of the worker or working people, we cannot do much things because the decision are taken by the parliamentarians. And one of many influential member of parliaments are also the ministers of very ministries, like what is called trade, banijya, trade ministry and other ministry. So our struggle, our movement cannot gain so too much momentum, and our demands to amend the law, inclusion of labor rights issues in the law, and the formalize the informalized worker of the RMG value chain and seafood value chain. This type of things are going ruined. And not another thing is
Sorry, Suntita, may I ask you to kindly wrap up in a minute?
I'll wrap up. And also we are facing regarding the gender equality in our country, we are also facing the other issues like other areas in South Asian countries, like fundamentalism. It is very much at present is very much, and not so much strong women rights movement is there in our country because of the political issues. Many women right leaders are politically involved in many areas. So the movement that was in 90s, it was a great women rights movement in our country, but at present it is not so much heavy. So the fundamentalist group are very much strong now. And other issues is patriarchy. It is a very patriarchal society in our country. Women cannot get their other rights and the right to work, and this type of things we are not yet achieved fully. I will share 3 new issues that we are facing, that is automation. In our industries, automation is going on. So many workers, because our women worker are very less educated and less technology friendly. So they are dropping out from the industries in which places the male workers are involving more. And another one is gig economy is a new phenomena for us, and it is also challenging for us. We cannot yet take any strategy. The trade unions also do not take too much strategy to face the gig economy and the and the organize these economy digital platform workers. And another one is the unplanned urbanization mega projects and PPP private-public partnership projects. These are mega projects going on, and which creates a lot of environmental disasters, displacement issues, where women are facing more problem. So yeah, another one another one is related to this. It is EPZ, export processing zone. Our government declared many areas as special economic zone areas, and these are mostly owned by the general people, poor people. The farmers are losing their land, and so so they are coming to the cities, doing as the informal sector workers, and many precarious conditions they are doing work. And related to COVID impact, there is a small point.
I'm
We
so
all
sorry,
know.
Santita. We
Yeah.
need to
Okay,
move
okay.
on a bit. Do
Okay,
you mind
thank you.
just, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we all know the impact of COVID, what we are facing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I hate to cut you off. It's such an honor to
No,
hear
no, no.
about
It's
the
all
work that you're doing in Bangladesh, and your really, complex analysis of how all of these issues are overlapping and affecting women workers in particular, and how the situation is only getting worse. So thank you so much for sharing. And we now turn to our next spotlight. We're moving to South Africa, to Dr. Leslie Ann Foster, who joins us from Masimanyane, as well as the International Network to End Violence Against Women and Girls. And she's also part of the effort surrounding the Feminists for a People's Vaccine. So thank you, Dr. Leslie, and over to you.
Thank you very much. It is an honor, and I'm very humbled to make this contribution today at the Global People's Assembly. The big concern that the civil society sector has, and feminists in particular, is that corporate capture has taken a stronghold on Africa and most other countries of the South, which is driving inequality on all levels. Absurd and unconscionable profits by Big Pharma were the feature of the COVID pandemic, with scant attention paid to the cost of human beings. The COVID-19 pandemic decimated the lives of people in the developing world, with the lowest income countries being severely affected. The loss of lives, the increase in debt, the hard knocks on economies resulted in untold hardship, including millions of jobs lost, food insecurity, high levels of gender-based violence, and deepened levels of poverty. The brunt of the pandemic was borne by women and girls. According to the People's Vaccine Alliance, the pandemic created 9 new billionaires from pharmaceutical companies. The Moderna vaccine was produced for as little as $2.85 a dose, yet its average cost is between $19 and $24 and can go up for poorer countries to $37 a dose. This gives a clear indication of how pharmaceutical companies in particular saw the opportunity to monetize access to what in essence are essential medicines for the gain of obscene profits at the expense of people's health and lives. In 2021 alone, Moderna reported a revenue of $18 billion and Pfizer of $37 billion. These inexcusably inflated prices, coupled with monopolized limited supply, made it almost prohibitive to lower and income countries to access these vaccines. This exclusionary approach deepens inequality by weakening the people and the economies of struggling countries. It also flouts the commitment to securing the protection of human rights and the upholding of the standards of non-discrimination and substantive equality. It takes us back to the dark ages when Black bodies were used for experimentation in the field of health, a practice which continues currently. In my own country, in South Africa, in 2020, Johnson & Johnson used South African health workers, most of whom are women, in a mandatory program for their vaccine clinical trial. J&J also used national facilities. Yes.
The interpreters are just asking if you can please slow down a bit so that they can keep up.
My apologies.
Sorry to interrupt.
All
Thank
right.
you.
J&J also used national facilities for the fill and finish process stage of the vaccine, which were only made available to the South African population after much protest and pressure. And we're currently seeing that the monkeypox vaccine is reportedly under clinical trial in Congo, with none of those vaccines being available to that local population because it's been bought up by rich countries. The Feminists for a People's Vaccine campaign is working with organizations in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Pacific developing countries in challenging Big Pharma and advocating for an end to vaccine apartheid. The current intellectual property regime has failed to meet its obligations to secure health rights globally, especially since almost all COVID-19 vaccines, medicines, treatments, and diagnostics are firmly placed in the hands of private, multinational pharmaceutical corporations, even when taxpayers finance a major part of product research and development. This is a travesty of justice because this institution has failed to deliver and is by design incapable of ensuring equitable, non-discriminatory, affordable access to COVID-19 diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics. As an African, I am outraged by the fact that approximately 1 billion people in developing countries remain unvaccinated. Africa continues to lag far behind with only 21.2% of its population fully vaccinated. Women and girls across these countries bear the impact of the lack of access to these technologies and to health services. A decline in testing has also meant a disregard for the evolution of the virus, prompting the World Health Organization Director General to caution that reported cases are increasing in almost 70 countries worldwide. Nearly 75% of populations in developed countries are fully vaccinated, against only 17.5% in populations in developing countries. By December 2021, of the more than 3 billion tests reported across the world, only 0.4% had been performed in developing countries, consequently leading to more undetected cases. The highest ratios of excess deaths to reported COVID-19 deaths occurred in parts of Central Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Across South Africa, we saw an estimated 2.6 million jobs lost, with 2 out of 3 being lost to women. The South African Minister of Police reported 120,000 calls to the National Domestic Violence Helpline in the first month of the COVID pandemic. And the Department of Health reported in 2021 that during the pandemic, more than 23,000 teenage pregnancies occurred in just one of the country's 9 provinces, with 997 of those being girls aged 10 to 14 years. This starts off a generational cycle of poverty for women and girls in our country. In Africa, we saw increases in sexually transmitted diseases amongst young women due to restricted mobility during the period of lockdown and the lack of access to healthcare and reproductive technologies for extended periods of time. Masimanyane Women's Rights International, working across 12 African countries, reported that the pandemic resulted in increased care burdens for women and girls, which led to physical, emotional, and mental health problems, which continue to exist. Corporate capture, as seen through the lens of the COVID-19, has widened the existing fissures of inequality, food and personal insecurity, as well as the lack of access to basic services such as education and healthcare. Global challenges are increasing, and these require global solutions, with all role players taking responsibility and committing to collectively addressing the problems. While we are able to some extent to hold states to account because we have mechanisms through the UN system for that, no such mechanisms exist for holding corporations to account. This requires strong commitment from the UN member states to ensure that the power of corporations does not continue unbridled, undermining the very values of the institution itself. As South Africans, we know that holding truth to power is an important strategy to stop the onslaught of attacks on our communities and societies and on human rights generally. We were faced with state and corporate capture, which wreaked havoc on our country. We've learned that an informed, active citizenry, committed, independent investigative journalism, and an independent judiciary were the most powerful resources we needed to stop the assault of the capture architects in our country. We were able to oust our president and his cohorts, and we are currently working to bring the culprits within the corporate sector to book. We successfully removed Shell Corporation from exploiting our coastal areas, and we have removed mining corporations such as the Australian mining company Mineral Commodities Limited and its local subsidiary Mineral Sands from our country with citizen protests. This is what collective responsibility looks like, and activism that we as feminists are engaged in. It is imperative that we curtail the growing hold of corporations globally, whose real focus is on profits while flouting the human rights of citizens. The Feminists for the People's Vaccine campaign echoes the sentiments of the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which affirmed that states must protect against the impact of the pandemic on individuals and groups subject to structural discrimination and disadvantage. It noted that discrimination in significant part attributed to consequences of the historical racial injustices of slavery and colonialism that remain largely unaccounted for to this day. In conclusion, the unequal distribution of vaccines between and within countries manifests as a global system, privileging those former colonial powers to the detriment of formerly colonialized states and descendants of enslaved groups. Furthermore, the committee called on all states, that's the third committee, to combat the pandemic guided by principles of international solidarity, including supporting the comprehensive intellectual property TRIPS waiver proposal, which was tabled by South Africa and India and co-sponsored by 64 countries. This spirit of solidarity should resemble that of the AIDS pandemic, but was completely watered down by northern countries such as the EU, the UK, Switzerland, and the US, entrenching existing vaccine apartheid and all other inequalities. The South African NGO Treatment Action Campaign, supported by South Africa's former President Nelson Mandela, successfully challenged Big Pharma and northern countries to secure affordable antiretrovirals for the country's population to fight HIV and AIDS. We have models that are successful. We should look to those to help us in this struggle. COVID-19 is not over. Therefore, we must continue to see that deep, unacceptable inequality in access to diagnostics, therapeutics, and treatment is urgently addressed. We urge the UN General Assembly to apply a global public good approach to replace the current intellectual property regime. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foster. Very much appreciate you being with us today and expanding even further the lens of this conversation to include all of these dynamics of corporate capture. It's about colonialism, it's about racism, it's about the unequal structures that govern so much of our health, international health system, and then international systems in general. So very much appreciate you being with us today. And now turn to Veronica Serafini. And Veronica joins us from LatinDad, which is the Latin American Network for Economic and Social Justice. And I think it'll flow very nicely into some analysis of the economic situation in which we find ourselves. So Veronica, over to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. I talk in Spanish, please.
Please go ahead.
Bueno, como LatinDad es una red regional para América Latina, nosotros estamos preocupados por dos temas que involucran a la captura corporativa en el sistema de Naciones Unidas desde un enfoque, desde la economía feminista. Nos preocupa por un lado el impulso que están teniendo las alianzas público-privadas y cómo se estén impulsando las alianzas público-privadas bajo la excusa del espacio fiscal, en un continente donde no hay espacio fiscal por los bajos niveles de tributación y la inequidad tributaria. Esas alianzas público-privadas traen consigo, por ejemplo, el cobro de tarifas. siendo que y afectando particularmente a las mujeres que tienen menores niveles de ingresos y casi la mitad no tiene autonomía económica, por un lado. Y por otro lado también estamos encontrando que las alianzas público-privadas que se han implementado en América Latina se sostienen con trabajo precario de las mujeres, porque muchas de esas APPs contratan mujeres y se aprovechan de las desigualdades de ingresos. Las alianzas público-privadas están, la influencia en las Naciones Unidas ha hecho que sean un indicador del Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible 17. Es decir, se parte del supuesto de que más alianzas público-privadas ayudarán a cumplir los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, incluyendo el 5, que tiene que ver con igualdad de género. Cuando que en realidad la evidencia en muchos de los países, inclusive europeos, indican que no garantizan los derechos las alianzas público-privadas. Eso por un lado. Y por otro lado, la otra preocupación que tenemos es el retorno de la deuda en América Latina, que se ha fortalecido e impulsado con la pandemia y que tiene dos implicancias: la deuda externa, la deuda soberana, que termina repercutiendo en las mujeres cuando a la hora de pagar no hay recursos suficientes y hay que limitar, por ejemplo, los servicios públicos, restringir la política fiscal. Pero por otro lado también el endeudamiento privado. Y hay una fuerte influencia de inversores, de las empresas, de las corporaciones financieras, para incorporar también lo que llamamos ahora bonos de género, que es la excusa empoderar a las mujeres, incluir financieramente a las mujeres, y lo que en realidad estamos haciendo es endeudar más a las mujeres. Se ofrecen bonos, por ejemplo, para las pequeñas y medianas empresas, donde están concentradas las mujeres, pero son pequeñas y medianas empresas que trabajan de manera precaria y también basadas en el trabajo no remunerado, en el empleo no remunerado de las mujeres. Con lo cual, lo que estamos enfrentando es un avance de modalidades de financiamiento que detrás tienen la financiarización de la vida cotidiana y que bajo el supuesto de mejora del empoderamiento económico de las mujeres, de la inclusión económica de las mujeres, de la ampliación de la prestación de servicios dirigidos a las mujeres, pero que en realidad significan y se sostienen sobre el trabajo no remunerado de las mujeres y que van a terminar precarizando la vida de las mujeres. Bueno, y la Tindal lo que está tratando de hacer en este ámbito es generar evidencia empírica, transformar ese discurso positivo. El problema no son solamente los efectos que causan este tipo de financiamiento a la vida de las mujeres y de los hombres también, sino también el relato, la construcción del discurso que hay que desarmar, porque ese discurso vacía de contenido, por ejemplo, el empoderamiento de las mujeres, o muestra como positivo la inclusión financiera de las mujeres cuando que en realidad la somete a una cadena de endeudamiento casi de por vida y de dependencia del sistema financiero. Entonces tenemos dos grandes desafíos en América Latina, que es mostrar cómo estas modales de financiamiento no garantizan los derechos de las mujeres ni la reducción de las desigualdades de género, y también combatir un relato que tiene mucha fuerza y que vacía de contenido las demandas y las reivindicaciones del movimiento feminista en la región. Gracias, Katie.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Really interesting to hear your perspectives about both the prevalence of public-private partnerships and then how feminists in the region are responding. So thank you. We're going to zoom out even further now and go to more of a global analysis from Marika Koenig, who is joining us from the International Trade Unions Confederation, as well as the Generation Equality Forum Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition. So thanks, Marika, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katie. And yeah, and thanks for being here. I've listened with great interest to what the previous speakers shared, because it actually underpins the deep need for the UN to have in place transparent accountability mechanisms when engaging with the private sector. It's really of critical importance, as demonstrated by the recent actions and calls of feminist movements and women's and human and labor rights movements, and the CSO leads of the Action Coalition on Economic Justice and Rights within the context of UN Women's MOU and BlackRock. Actually, the UN system offers the private sector many pathways to influence its work, principles and policies, either through partnerships, MOUs, memorandum of understandings, hubs where private sector are presented as experts, and so on. And just to give you a few examples, like the recent 5-year partnership signed between Microsoft and the UN Human Rights Office, focusing on which is done within the context of human rights, but how, we don't know. Or the United Nations Development Program partnering with polluters in Colombia who destroy actually those polluters, the private sector, they destroy the habitats of indigenous communities and attack their rights because of their thirst for fossil fuels. And then you have philanthropies and business given a prominent role as experts in the lead up to the Global Digital Compact. So there's quite a list. This is just illustrating a few. And I would also like to go back to the case of UN Women, who has actually a track record of highly problematic and questionable private sector partnerships and engagements. Many of you will know the famous Uber case, which came to the front at one of the sessions of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. Uber was offering 1 million jobs for women, while it was publicly known that these jobs are cheap, are precarious, and are actually framed in such a way that Uber can bypass national labor laws. So those workers have no rights, and this is what their offer was. And it's a pity that UN Women didn't learn anything from this because of the recent thing which happened with BlackRock. But there's also something else UN Women has in place as a private sector engagement strategy, and that are the women's women's empowerment principles, and where companies are asked to sign on to 7 principles, including, just to give an example, treat all women and men fairly at work, respect and support human rights and non-discrimination. Sounds fantastic. However, the only ask is to use these principles as a guidance for doing business, and their website literally states that equality means business. Nearly 7,000 companies signed on to these principles, and these principles are an empty shell. They are not framed in any meaningful international labor or human rights treaties, like some of the ILO labor standards, which would secure decent work and rights for women workers, just to mention a few. And there's, of course, no annual transparent reporting mechanism, and there are no accountability mechanisms. While these companies can put the banner on their website that they have endorsed these principles, which are meaningless. And there's also the UN Women webpage welcoming partnerships with the private sector and philanthropies, and stating that they can play an active and central role in transforming our world to achieve gender equality. But no details on, again, strong references to the human and labor rights framework. So these are all concerning, as we have seen recently, again, with BlackRock. So because of the lack of coherent, transparent accountability mechanisms, these engagements with the private sector happen without strings attached and can in many cases contradict the overarching goals of the UN and the UN entities, including the Sustainable Development Goals. These operations are problematic and are happening often behind closed doors. And worse is that there's just a lack of annual assessments, reporting, what these private sector engagements deliver in terms of truly advancing, embracing fundamental human and labor rights. Nothing. For instance, ILO fundamental labor rights, which contribute to closing the gender pay gap and discrimination. They have very good, high standards on ending gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work, and so on. So due diligence and transparent procedures are which private sector should adhere to are absolutely critical for the way forward. So UN Women, actually announced within the context of the talks we all had, with some of us had within the context of BlackRock, but they announced that they will develop a new private sector engagement strategy, which will over the next coming 9 months. So this is, there will be from, the groups engaged in this conversation with UN Women, there will be anyway ongoing follow-up on this private sector engagement of UN Women. But what I actually wanted to point towards that this might also be an opportunity to ensure that UN Women shows leadership within the UN system by reviewing all forms of private sector engagement strategies and partnerships. So this is their chance to do the right thing. And so, for instance, there are many good guidelines. They're very well known and they are very much aware of it, but they've never proactively used them. But there are guidelines on how you can apply due diligence across all your supply chains. These guidelines are from the UN itself, from the ILO, from the OECD. So you can use them, as you can use the ILO labor conventions as the basis to frame and develop an accountability mechanisms and reporting mechanisms. And this way you can drive things forward and really achieve system change. This is the only way forward. And so I would actually say that UN Women and the entire UN system, of course, they can only deliver when they have these kind of mechanisms in place. And this will be really the critical way to contribute to our call for system change, rooted in a rights-based approach with transparent accountability mechanisms throughout the process and to do this on a very regular basis, including with assessments and evaluations. It's about time, high time, and I hope that UN Women takes this opportunity to lead now and to do the right thing. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marika, for identifying some of the ways that accountability and transparency might actually function at the UN, and kind of reminding us all of what the UN is supposed to be standing for in terms of human rights, in terms of upholding the ILO conventions, rather than kind of voluntary principles embraced by corporations who want to look better and make more money. So at this point in our conversation, we're almost out of time, and we had been hoping to have some breakout groups, but obviously that won't be possible now. But I'd like to take one or two very brief and pointed comments or questions from the floor before I turn it over to Amelia Reyes to wrap us up. So if you'd like to ask a question or make a very brief comment, please use the raise hand function. It's under reactions. Oh, maybe you're not allowed. Okay, you can put in the chat a star or a plus if you'd like to speak. And we can take one or two before we wrap up, because I know we've had such an interesting and wide-ranging share of perspectives so far from our speakers, both what's happening on the ground and how this relates to what we should be asking for here at the Global People's Assembly and at UN General Assembly Week in terms of the UN living up to its principles. I don't see anyone wishing to come in. maybe just to say on behalf of the Feminist Action Nexus for Economic and Climate Justice and the Women's Major Group, how committed we are to finding opportunities to continue this conversation with all of you, and to work with our speakers and all of our attendees on really figuring out how we do advance a systems change or a systemic approach at the UN, how we reframe the lens of the UN away from these kind of high level media moments of corporate engagement, of heads of state, of flashy, receptions in hotels that are happening this week, onto people power and workers movements and all of the work that so many of you are involved in all over the world. So maybe with that, I'll turn to Amelia Reyes. Amelia is part of the Action Nexus and the Women's Major Group, as well as many other coalitions, the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development, Campaign of Campaigns, and gender equality focused NGO in Mexico. So Amelia, over to you to close us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And what a fantastic lineup of speakers who were giving us light in so many of the impacts of corporate capture. I just wanted to highlight some points. One is that corporate capture undermines democracies, emphasizes colonial and imperial points of entry into the territories of the Global South, especially impacting at the community levels for indigenous peoples, lands, etc. So this is one major point of entry. And the second one is also that by prioritizing profit over the well-being of people and the planet, what we are seeing, of course, is that there is an undermining of the democratic multilateral system. So that in itself is a risk that we cannot bear to run anymore, especially with all of the global crisis. But even more, by prioritizing profit over the well-being of people on the planet, we are also seeing that the most wealthy are promoting all of these measures and undermining the rule of law and actually giving room to fascistic regimes all over the world, but even more in the global north, that has a major impact in the global south and in the global multilateral system. So this is why this is a matter that concerns us all. And it is very dangerous. And I will have to also point out how, given the global inequalities, most of these global corporations that are capturing democratic powers and decision-making and reaching out even at the policy level at national states and local policies, these practices are also having an impact in the destruction of our planet. The corporate extraction, as many of our speakers pointed out, are directly related to biodiversity destruction through the extraction that they're promoting in the territories, violating human rights, and also challenging and undermining the dignity and integrity of environmental and human rights defenders. So this is a point of entry that is very challenging, because those very same actors who are expected to lead with the human rights framework, with gender equality and environmental principles, are the one being co-opted and acting against those principles that they vowed to promote and to enact in the territory. So it is a shame not only that the UN and other multilateral spaces are co-opted, but also governments at regional, national, and local level. So this is why this is agenda that should concerns us all. I just want to close saying that in the case of the BlackRock example, there were actions at the inside and outside, right? In the case of the inside strategy, the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition led a very direct dialogue with UN Women and led into a conversation that expanded with other action coalitions to hold UN Women accountable. But there is also power in cross-movement mobilization, such as the one that happened with the BlackRock campaign, and we had 600 plus endorsements from all around the world. And I will have to say also that this is what Sanam was referring, that this shows that people power can come up to the front and to bringing a global transformation, meaningful transformation. And this is perhaps the future of our work, right? Not to get into work in silos. We see how all of the agendas, environmental, social, democratic, political, economical, all of these are intertwined. All of these are upholding the dignity and life of the people and the health of the planet. So this is just an invitation to move forward with cross-movement mobilization and action so that we can really fight back and try to bring in many victories in the future, such as the one we had with the BlackRock MOU with UN Women. We think this is just the start. There are many places that we need to build upon as of now, and we look very much forward to keep on engaging with all of you in these types of initiatives. So thank you so much for the organizers of this event, and thank you so much, audience, who are willing also to challenge the power and to stand here in bringing out the real solutions that we all want. Thank you so much.